and talk a little bit about one aspect of work zone. We are fortunate to be able to work and support the Iowa DOT and others in a lot of different areas of work zone. This project came up about 4 years ago, and so we wanted to share that with you as other states are starting to be interested in use of temporary rumble strips. Keith, I just want to confirm you can see my screen.
Yes, I can. It looks good. And just so everybody knows, if you want to reestablish your chat pod, scroll up to the blue tab at the top of your screen, hit the chat icon, and you can ask questions. I'll be tracking that the entire time Neil and Skylar are talking. Go ahead.
So we were approached, both Skylar Knickerbocker and myself, as well as several folks from the Iowa DOT, and asked about temporary rumble strips. The reason this came up is that there was a group put together called RISC, or Roadway Industry Safety Consensus. This group was made up of both DOT and contractors, mainly focused around the paving industry. And the concern was the number of fatal and serious injury crashes in flagging operations, two-lane roads here in Iowa. And they didn't know if temporary rumble strips are an option, but what they do know is that a lot of people seem to be on their phones and not paying attention and driving too fast. And so they really said, what can you look at very quickly for us? Limited data, but just help us understand if this is something worth pursuing or not. And so we did. So we wanted to get out, get some field observations, and bring that back to the group for a healthy discussion. So just to give you just a quick background, as many of you are out in the counties working, or even periphery of the cities, in many cases you're driving along miles and miles of two-lane rural roads, typically 55 and above speeds, and sometimes the geometry is pretty good, sometimes it's not, but oftentimes, you know, a lot of folks are using these roads and then they come upon something like this, where you've got the sun glaring in your eyes, there's a queue that you've come up on, and there's a flagger, and you're waiting for a pilot car, and it's a two-lane, now a one-lane operation. So nobody's very happy about the delay, and oftentimes people just simply don't look up and start crashing into this queue and causing all kinds of havoc. So this is not an uncommon situation today in any of the states that you guys are in. It's a high probability that people are coming up on these types of situations. So some of the advantages of using temporary rumble strips would be they're fairly easy to install, and then you can pull them back up. You can obviously reuse them on multiple projects over a construction season, multiple seasons. It is something audible that bumps the driver and hopefully gets them to look up from their phone or from the daydream that they're in. And it can help increase braking and reduce speeds if you've noticed the bump and you are now visually aware of what's in front of you. Some of the disadvantages that have been pointed out is that it can cause erratic and avoiding maneuvers by drivers. It can be rough for motorcycles and bikes. It can also have a potential for movement of these rumble strips along the roadway and ending up not where you placed them that morning, and noise complaints by residents. So those are all some valid positives and negatives. So the concern of the group was really, hey, can you just help us understand, do they work, and do these things stay on the road? And so that's what we set about doing. To give you a little bit of background, the Iowa DOT developed or put together a developmental spec for use of these temporary rumble strips. The outline is shown here. They initially desired having 2 sets of rumble strips, each set having 3. So you would go over the first 3, you would go over the next 3, and then as going from left to right, you see the flagger position with the photo showing the position of the flagger. So this is sort of their initial take at each end of the work zone. They would do 2 sets of 3 rumble strips. So what we wanted to do is work with contractors and say, well, we'd really like to see getting some speeds and some video without any rumble, so just standard layout, no rumble strips whatsoever. And then the developmental spec with the 2 sets of 3 rumble strips. And then the group also wanted to evaluate 1 set of 3 rumble strips, which you see here, with a sign at that location saying rumble strips ahead and moving the road work ahead out a little bit. So I'm going to go back 1 slide. This is the developed spec, and this is then the modification of that. So our objective was really to look at what are drivers doing when they encounter these in the work zone. So braking activity, are they changing their speed, and what kind of crazy avoidance behavior might be going on. So when we talk about driver braking before, this video will show, this is a driver coming up. The arrow shows where the rumble strips are, and they're braking in advance of those rumble strips. You can see there's no cars in front of them, so they're reacting to the rumble strips, maybe not sure how severe those are. Here we've got a van coming up on it. They brake in advance as well. The next vehicle is braking because of the van, and then 2 additional vehicles. So that's driver braking before. And then braking after, here's another example of that. You can see we've got a crest of a hill, you've got a truck coming over the hill and seeing the work zone up ahead. They react when they see these rumble strips where the arrow is pointing, but then they're really having to stop and slow down because we've got people in the road and a flagger right up in front of them. And then the third example here is avoidance. We saw a little bit of this, as I'll show you with numbers. To be fair on this one, we later found out that this is one of the supervisors on this roadway project, and he drives through here a lot, but doesn't matter. Here's the rumble strips again. You can see that he just slides to the left out around them, waits, holds out there till he gets to the next set, and then eventually comes back in. So he probably really freaked out that tractor trailer driver, wondering what the heck this guy's doing driving in the opposite direction. So in terms of methodology, we used video trailers that had both wavetronic sensors and cameras, so we were able to collect data the whole time. These trailers were placed just in advance of the rumble strips, so we could look back at them and watch driver behavior as well as capture speed at the location of the trailer. This is kind of what it looked like. So we have our typical layout with the 2 sets of 3 rumble strips each. We would have an upstream trailer with video pointing back towards the first set of rumbles. We'd call those the advance. We're capturing speed at that point along the roadway, and then the same is occurring here just after that first set, looking now at the second set of rumbles. We only looked in one direction. We were limited on the number of locations we could collect data, but we didn't do it for both directions for the same work zone. We reviewed each of the video. We coded them based on the observations, the timestamps, the vehicle types. Did they brake? Were there any erratic maneuvers, etc.? This is just a photo showing what it looks like on Highway 92. For one of the locations, the set of 3 rumble strips laid out across the roadway and a large truck going across them. So the 2 locations we collected data, one was US 52 in northeast Iowa. Here's an example of the advanced trailer looking back towards the work zone. You can see the queue of cars in the top right. You can also see this T63, which is the other trailer collecting data, both speed and then video of the rumbles. Second location was Highway 92 near Oskaloosa here in Iowa, in District 5. And again, it's the same setup. We collected about over 9 hours with no rumble strips, 20 hours with standard developed spec with the 2 sets of 3 rumble strips, and then about 9.7 hours, almost 10 hours of the modified. So we did observation data, we looked at braking and avoidance, and we looked at speed. So I'd like to talk about those for just a minute. In terms of braking and avoidance, I showed you a video of what some of that looks like. We contrasted the results by was it upstream or down, and by which setup we were considering: nothing, standard, and modified. So in terms of braking and avoidance, this graphic shows point 1, 2, 3, and 4. So points 1 and 2 show percent braking before the rumble. Without any rumble strips, we saw 9% just would be braking. There they would have seen a roadwork ahead. With the standard 2 sets of 3 rumbles, there were 18% were braking. And then with the modified setup, where there's a sign saying rumble strips, but only 1 set, it was 26%, so a little bit higher on the modified setup. If you look at the downstream, the numbers are a little bit different. But overall here, we saw 10% without anything, 29% standard, 33% modified. In terms of the number of people driving around, we really found that was negligible, and so it's roughly 1%. At the downstream location, similar, we had 18% without, 23 up to 30 with the modified. We had a little bit of a difference with the this location 4, where more people put their brakes on without any rumble strip than they did with the standard setup. A little bit higher with the modified. As you get closer to the back of the queue, to the visibility of the flagger and the work zone operation, there is some influence there. But overall, there was increased braking, specifically with the modified setup. The percent there, again, driving around the rumble was about 3%. So now let's talk a little bit about speed. We looked both at advance, we collected speed in advance and after the upstream rumble strips. What we found, combining both roadway locations, was that without rumble strips, we saw a negligible change in speed. With the standard 2 sets of 3 rumble strips, we saw about 5.5 miles per hour reduction. And then with the modified setup, again, an advanced sign saying rumble strips ahead, and only 1 set, we saw about a 3.7 mile per hour reduction. So when we were asked, do they work and will they stay down? We did have one example where there was a car following with a truck, and apparently the rumble strip kicked up and hit the back of the car, and that was the only example we saw over that 2-year season, two seasons, where something like that occurred. But in terms of do they work, do they stay down, based on the limited observations we had, and it is not easy to follow these crews moving along the roadway, having to move these trailers and follow contractor schedules. So we were straight up in saying this is limited observations, but what we did see from what we collected was increased driver braking, reduced vehicle speeds, and minimal driver avoidance. Since the study was done, the Iowa DOT went ahead and developed their permanent specification for the use of temporary rumble strips. It's that modified layout that you saw earlier, our option 3. It's got the rumble strips ahead sign. It moves the roadwork ahead sign out a little further, and it includes only 1 set of 3 rumble strips. I just spoke today with Willie Sorensen, who was one of the Iowa DOT leads on this project, and who does a lot of work in the area of traffic and safety, specifically with work zones. And he noted that prior to temporary rumble strips, they averaged about 1 fatal or major injury per year in work zone operations on 2-lane roads where there's a flagger pilot car. Since then, they've had 0. He said there were 2 crashes since then. One was a person that had a medical condition. The other was someone who was eluding the police. He said that complaints have gone down on handling these. They are heavy and bulky. and he was very pleased overall that they've implemented use of these devices. There are a number of companies building cribs on the front and backs of trucks, retrieval systems like this one, which will hook and pull the device off the roadway so the truck isn't out on the road. There's also some larger trucks that will actually just come and lift and stack the rumble strips as well, all from inside of the truck. I did want to add here at the end that Virginia DOT, in a sort of a similar time, a little bit later than Iowa, but we collaborated with them a lot, have adopted use of temporary rumble strip in a big way. They've procured over 200 sets. I'm sure it's higher than that by now. Used on all temporary operations of greater than 1 hour but less than 3 days. This is for their maintenance crews and contractors. Use of 2-lane and multi-lane roadways, so those are the places they would apply. And then for most of the DOT trucks, they're building a crib in front of the truck to hold these, and their standard layout is provided here. So with that, I'd like to end with Keith. I don't know if we'll provide an opportunity for questions at the end or now. Either way is fine with me.
Sure. Why don't we, if you want to stop sharing,
yeah.
That'll get them. So if anybody's got any questions for this particular subject for Neil, go ahead and go into the chat pod. Should be over on your right. If it's not, there's an icon in the upper right that you can hit, or you can go into the view drop-down menu in the upper left and go ahead and ask questions to all participants so everybody can see it. We'll wait a few minutes here to let people get that going. Any questions for Neil? Okay, well, if you think of any, of course, you can always chat to all participants. When people are showing full screen, there's a blue tab somewhere on your screen that you need to scroll to, and a drop-down menu will occur, and you hit the chat icon, and the chat panel will appear. If you think of anything as Skylar's talking, absolutely put it in the chat pod. We should have some time here at the end to ask questions of both the speakers. Again, thanks, Neil. I am going to make Skylar the presenter.
My pleasure.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great. Make Skylar the presenter and give it a bit of time, Skylar, and you should be able to share your screen now.
All right. Just confirm you can see my presentation now.
I can. Thank you.
All right. Perfect. Well, good afternoon, good morning. I'm going to talk to you today about some work we're doing with the Iowa DOT related to smart aero boards and other connected traffic control type devices that we're trying to use and implement in our work zones. And I always like to start off with a question of, do you feel as with your state, city, county, that you can provide a feed that shows every single lane closure every minute of the day? And I ask this question because for most agencies, it's no, that we can't provide this good data of where our work zones are to either provide out to the public for trip planning or just to use internally to understand the sort of impacts that our work zones and maintenance operations are having on the public. And for most DOTs and some bigger cities, 511 is the resource where people go to get this information, and it's the way that most agencies provide that data out to the public of notifying where work zones are or where travel can be impacted. And this is typically planned information that we put out on these websites of saying where we expect to be working and what times we expect to be working, and then any sort of restrictions for trucks out there where a width limit or some sort of height or weight limit are in effect. But the problem with this is typically we don't have very high quality data. an example of this is in Iowa is a lot of work zones have intermittent lane closures where we just say that for this long stretch, in this case 7 miles of roadway, there could be any sort of closure from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. on weekdays. So as a driver, or eventually when we get to autonomous vehicles, like how can they use that information? Because you never know when the work zone is actually going to be closed. And as for a user perspective, the people in the field don't know exactly when they're going to be out there. So this is kind of an easy catch-all to at least have something out there, but not really detailed information. The other situation that we run into is where we have duplicate lane closure information. In this in another example in Iowa, there was a location where we had 4 different lane closures, all at the same location with varying amounts of information and sometimes some conflicting information of what actual lanes or shoulders were closed due to the work in the area. And then just overall in general, just inaccuracies of actually saying that there's going to be a lane closure out there or that it's reduced to 1 lane, but if you go look at any camera image, you'll see that there's no work out there, and that's because either they planned on not working that night and just never notified traffic management center or anybody to update the information, or it ended up raining, so they quit their work early, or any variety of reasons why the work isn't going on and never updating that information. So really, there's this need to improve work zone data. So mainly for the public to hopefully improve safety of getting the data to the actual navigation system, so people can, instead of having to use a system like Neil talked about earlier of using rumble strips to wake up the driver to let them know that there's a work zone ahead, could we get it directly to the vehicle, either through the vehicle's ADS system or to just the navigation system to let the driver know that, yeah, there is a work zone up ahead, and you're going to need to tap on the brakes or do something because it's not your normal driving situation. And one of the early ways that most people say is, well, we can just ask for the people in the field to give us more information. And we know that they're already limited in the amount of resources that they have. We don't have a project inspector at the job 24/7 to provide those updates. They definitely don't want to have to fill out another form to say that they're going to be working in this area. So are there other methods that we can get around instead of having to ask the people in the field to submit this information, and then knowing that there's going to be human error in any of that work where we're asking them to provide this information? And to be honest, they're more focused on the concrete going down or putting in the culvert or doing any of this work activity, and not trying to update this information in real time of when lanes are being closed and what the status of the work zone is. So the proposal that we've been working on with Iowa DOT is how can we use this field data, this connected field data, to update this information, to say when the work zone is actually active and where the actual work zone starts and stops. And these devices that we're looking at essentially are just saying, I know who I am, I know where I'm at, and I'm on. And can we use that information to update the data to say, yeah, the work zone's active, or yeah, here's actually where the work zone is active, and providing that out to the public to improve our work zone data. So using these connected temporary traffic control devices is the term we're using to improve where our active lane closures are within the state of Iowa. And this is definitely a new market of devices out there. There's not a ton of widespread adoption, and really I kind of categorize it into these three different categories. The first is existing traffic control devices that we're typically working with already today. So arrow boards, flaggers, automated signals. Can we modify these devices, or these devices are actually being modified currently to start providing this information, letting you know where the work zone is or where the device is and what the status of those devices are. So they're great to start with for at least the Iowa DOT because it's things that the people in the field are already familiar with and know how to operate and use. Then there's this other new category of connected temporary traffic control devices, and that includes in the picture on the left these connected pins that actually go inside of a cone that transmit their location, and they have a solar panel at the top to keep the battery charged, and a switch at the bottom that you're supposed to flip to say when the work zone is active, or these panels, which they are used in some states quite frequently, and they have different ways of collecting data, but the manufacturer for these is planning on having like a green and a red one, where you put one at the beginning of the work zone and another one at the end of the work zone that to then indicate where the work zone starts and stops. And the reason I say these are new connected temporary traffic control devices is because these are additional devices that we're going to have to ask the people in the field to deploy as part of their work zone traffic control setup, and having them precisely placed at the correct location, and remembering to add these to the work zone as part of their traffic control setup. So we haven't focused on as much on these at this point, just because that is going to take a lot of training to get people to add these to their work zones, but it's at least something to keep in mind and be aware of the potential of these types of devices. And then the final one is automated vehicle location. So with the Iowa DOT, all of their snowplows or maintenance vehicles are equipped with AVL. They did it because to be able to track the snowplows and how much material was being put down in winter operations. But we have the added benefit that these are the same trucks that are being used to haul the attenuator or just be using these maintenance operations, that we can use the data from the AVL system to know where these maintenance operations are going on, and then continue to expand these devices to the manager's trucks. There's different systems out there that will connect to the flashes in the vehicle to notify when the vehicle turns its flashers on or potentially is in a maintenance operation, and using that data to as another input to improve the work zone data. So for the rest of the presentation, I'll focus more on the smart arrow boards, because that's been at the forefront for the Iowa DOT, and all the struggles and process that we've done to get to this point. The advantages of the arrow boards is they provide real-time lane closure information, and the biggest thing that I kind of alluded to earlier is it's no additional work for the people in the field. It's the same, just flipping on the switch and indicating what the arrow direction or the dancing diamonds on the arrow board are, and there's no real indication to them that it's anything different from what they currently do now in terms of placing the device. And then the other added benefit is we could modify the current inventory to add a retrofit kit to meet the requirements of the communication that we have for the smart arrow boards for deploying these older devices out on the road as well. And so really what makes a smart or an arrow board smart? And there's really no difference other than the communication. The smart arrow boards will have a GPS as well as a cell modem connected as part of their setup, which will draw a little bit more power, but they essentially will just be broadcasting their location at some frequency and the status of what the arrow board is. We also have some requirements that indicate that if there's any sort of lamp failure, the location of the arrow board, what direction it is, whether it's stowed or anything like that, but it's really just communicating that information back to us. and we really wanted to get industry support for this and get their input on what's the best way of deploying these the devices. And as part of through all of last year in 2019, we worked with them to figure out what's the best deployment method, and we started we put something out there of an initial protocol where the Smart Aero Board communicates directly with our traffic management center, and it follows a pretty standard procedure that the Iowa DOT does of adding DMS to projects or anything like that, where they're supposed to notify the TMC that the board's out there, and that they essentially have to register the device with the TMC so that the TMC knows that they need to start pulling data from that Smart Aero Board and it's associated with the project. But some of the issues that we identified is that we already currently do this with our DMS, and it takes a lot of more resources, both for the contractors in the field to notify the traffic management center that this aero board is going to be on the project, but then also for the DOT to be integrating every single one of these devices into their system when there could be thousands of these devices across at least the state of Iowa that would need to be integrated into the system. So we got a lot of pushback from industry on this initial protocol that we developed. So after listening to the industry and coming back to the table and rethinking how we wanted to do this, we ultimately decided to go with what we're now calling option one, which is the data gets pushed to the manufacturer's servers, and then we pull the data from the manufacturer's servers at some frequency, which allows the DOT to not have to maintain or interact with the contractors regularly to understand what devices are out on the work zones. The manufacturers just provide all the work zones that are within the state of Iowa, and we can then pull all that data, and whether it's on a local road or a state roadway or a county roadway, the DOT gets the data from those aero boards and then makes the determination of what aero boards are actually on their system that they want to monitor and associate to work zones. And the aero boards will push any type of status changes. So if it changes from a left to a right arrow, it'll update the server. If it moves more than 500 feet, it'll update the server. And then also if it provides a health check, that every 30 minutes to an hour, it'll just send its information to the server just to, so we know that it's still out there, the batteries haven't died, or somebody hasn't stolen the batteries, and it's still active on those work zones. And I kind of talked about this, but yeah, the feed will update. The pattern changes within 2 minutes. If it moves more than 500 feet, within 2 minutes, and then that health check every 30 minutes. So by doing this ensures that Iowa DOT is getting real-time data from these aero boards that we can use to update our work zone locations, and then it doesn't require any additional work for the people in the field to update this data. We're actually using just these devices to automate that process of updating the work zone location, and not having to worry about any of that integration aspects. That all happens on the manufacturer's end of providing that data to the Iowa DOT. In terms of deployment, Iowa is planning on deploying all interstate projects that are let in October of 2020. So any project that will be out there in 2021 on interstates will be required to have a Smart Aero Board. And then they plan on expanding that to all state roadways by 2022 of requiring that a Smart Aero Board is on the project, so that we have that real-time data, knowing where our work zones are, and hopefully improving the work zone data that we're providing out to the public. As a secondary effect of this is understanding what do we actually do with this data. One of the methods that we've been testing at Iowa State is an automation for associating Smart Aero Boards to 511 events. So this video just shows a 511 event that we created outside of our office building here in Ames, and it has linear extents, and then we spatially associate the aero board with the 511 event. and we then update the 511 event to show exactly where that arrow board starts, and then ultimately when that second pin or that arrow board, in this case it's a pin that we were testing that I talked about earlier, whenever it shows up at the end of the work zone, it updates that 511 event, and then we get an actual accurate representation of where the work activity is actually starting and stopping, rather than these long extents where we typically provide the work zone because we don't know exactly where the work zone will start and stop, or we just provide easy mile markers to provide to the TMC of where work zones actually start and stop. So that's a lot of work that the Iowa DOT is doing. In terms of local agencies, there's still value in the smart arrow boards, even if you don't have a full functioning traffic management center or any sort of planned work zone data. A lot of these devices right now will connect to Waze and provide that data out. So this is an example where one of the contractors that we gave these devices to put a smart arrow board out, as well as one of the connected pins that we have, and you can see that data show up on Waze. And again, the contractor actually had no idea that the data was even going out to Waze and being available for public to know where the work zone was. And it was actually the manufacturer that let the Iowa DOT know as well that this was showing up on the map, and we're actually providing this information out to the public, even though the contractor didn't have to do anything with it. So there's value in deploying these devices, even as a local agency, to get that data out there. And as a driver, if you've ridden with Waze, you know that you get the alerts that there's a work zone ahead, and providing this accurate data, you can start informing the drivers of where your work activity is ongoing, and trying to get them to slow down before you even get there. And then for the next steps in Iowa, we're looking to implement the latest work zone data exchange. I talked earlier about how Iowa is currently providing, and most states are currently providing data out through their 511 website, which covers a variety of different planned and unplanned incidents. The US DOT is leading a push to provide better work zone data, and they're calling that the WZDX, or the Work Zone Data Exchange. So if anybody is interested in better ways of communicating work zone data out to the public, I would definitely recommend looking into that, or reaching out to myself, and I can get you pointed in the direction of who to contact. But Iowa hopes to produce a new WZDX feed so we can provide that data out to the public, and then expand the communication protocol that we developed to smart flaggers and other connected devices, such as the pins, and trying to figure out how we can start integrating that into our systems, similar to what we've done with the smart arrow boards, and then just deploying that on our entire system and getting better work zone data overall. So I'll open it up to questions now.
Okay, Skylar, thanks. If you want to stop sharing, we can get back to, there we go. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead and open up your chat panel, either through the icon or through the view drop-down menu in your upper left. The icon should be in your upper right. For either one of the presenters, Neil or Skylar, now would be the time. Try to chat to all participants so everybody can see it. So we got one question. I'm assuming you guys can see this, Neil and Skylar. It looks like you got one for Neil here. Any consideration of not needing to provide the rumble strip ahead warning sign as part of your setup? Doesn't seem to be needed by MUTCD unless you have a vulnerable user concern.
Yeah, I think in that case, you know, the Iowa DOT just decided they wanted to use that as part of that modified setup, and industry was there, you know, kind of when they were making that decision, supporting it as well. So that's just the way they decided they wanted to do that and provide that sign.
Okay. Looks like you got another one there too, Neil. Any available publication from your study?
No, there's really not any kind of a write-up, because this was just grabbing some field data and providing it to this working group. So this presentation is about as documented as you're going to get.
Okay.
Happy to share those results as folks want to email you, Keith. We can provide that.
Sure. And of course, we're recording this presentation also, and that'll eventually be posted on the Intran website for anybody to access. And of course, you can also go onto the Intran's website and contact any of us.
And I might add, this is kind of the trend for things like this, where states do try things, they just don't document it. We ask, to do a larger study with more legitimate study with more samples, et cetera. Of course, there was $0 for that, and so this was super low budget, just trying to help them make some decisions. But and opportunities for more down the road.
And Neil, I was actually able to find our write-up, so I provided that in the chat pod if anybody wants to access that.
Yep.
Right. So again, if you need that link, everybody, it's on in the chat pad now, and of course you can contact us too. Any other questions for either Neil or Skylar?
So I think there's one for me of the truck-mounted aero panels. That has been one of the discussion items for within the Iowa DOT of getting the these mobile and truck-mounted flash and aero panels, getting the data from those. It's in our work plan right now, or at least Iowa DOT's work plan of trying to figure out the best way of getting the data from those. We're still working on a method. We're hoping to, again, our systems are, we already have an AVL system where we're communicating with those maintenance vehicles. So we're hoping that we can figure out how to get the data from those devices. But in terms of contractor provided aero boards, those would fall within that same communication protocol that we're communicating with any other trailer mounted aero boards that are out there.
Okay, thanks. Does anybody else have any questions for either of the speakers? There you go, Neil. There's one about concerns about temporary rumble strips on motorcycles. Do you think the one-day studies really captured enough data? Has obtaining input from a user group been considered?
We definitely don't think we collected enough data, and we knew that we would not be able to. I would suggest, so Virginia DOT has been using these, I believe, at least for one full season now, on with all their maintenance crews. And so that might be a source for looking into further documentation, but I have not seen anything specific to motorcycles that I can recall. I know that the vendors have some information on their websites, but I don't recall seeing any studies that properly document the impact these might have at different speeds for non-vehicle users.
Yeah. And I know, again, those are concerns that come up with permanent rumble strips. Of course, a completely different kind of design, but for the most part, they don't have a negative impact, at least for the permanent ones that I recall, at least from 10 years ago.
Right, and to the point about a user group, at the time there was not consideration. The user group was the contractors and DOT, but it wasn't a project where we would say, okay, now let's go out and get some driver feedback or community feedback, things like that we might do in more of a traffic calming, speed mitigation type of study.
Any other questions? Okay, well, again, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Skylar. Again, I think great presentations. These are recorded. Don't forget, again, we've got a couple more webinars coming up before we take our August break. One on heated pavements the first week of August, and one on ethics next week, which I'll be doing next Friday. You're all welcome to, again, register and attend those. And that should be about it. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy, treat everybody as an essential being, and I think we'll all be okay. Come back soon, and thank you very much, folks.